Mr. Vice Mayor, council members, Mr. Town Manager, and others, thank you for, we wanted to be able to give you a briefing of what the digital infrastructure really means to let you all know what's going on. So when I spoke with the manager, your town manager, a couple of weeks ago, he had a bunch of questions. You know, why are these data centers increasing? Why are they important? What is a data center? How do they function? What about the electricity and stuff? So we decided we would go ahead and pull together some experts to be able to talk about that. On the digital infrastructure, John Martin, who is the president and CEO of RVA757 Connects, he will talk about that. Then following him will be Kate Smiley with the Data Center Coalition. And then following Kate will be Stan Blackwell with Dominion Energy. So to that, I'll let John take it over.
Thanks, Greg. Well, good evening, and thank you for having us brief you on this big topic. RVA757 Connects, you have a brochure in front of you. This is an association of large companies and universities in the Richmond region we call RVA, and in Hampton Roads 757. And so we have learned by watching successful regions all across the country that neighboring jurisdictions shouldn't try to compete, but rather collaborate and convene and work together to make things happen. And what we want to do is have a robust economy and a great quality of life with Richmond and Hampton Roads. So we're working together, and this brochure shows you some of our initiatives, and I'd encourage you to go a little bit deeper. But we are successful in that we have all these companies supporting us. So we're a nonprofit, and Greg and I run the organization, and we have board meetings, and all of these big companies have put together an agenda that we're executing against. And one of them was to get the attention to I-64 to get it widened from the Richmond Airport to Williamsburg. And you know that's happening. Thankfully, the administration and General Assembly found the money. But we're also trying to get the Fall Line Trail and providing that support, which originates or ends here, whichever way you're looking. But also there's a trail called the Virginia Capitol Trail that runs from Richmond to Williamsburg. We want it to go all the way to Virginia Beach. So we're all about that, about more passenger rail service. And we're about something called the Global Internet Hub. And that's what I want to explain to you. You know, we live in an age where data is growing exponentially. And there are a lot of statistics out there, but 90% of all the data that exists today got created in the last 2 years. And so if you look at any of the growth curves, it's a factor of 5x the way the internet traffic is growing and growing. And just think about all the devices that we have now, from our smartphones to our cars. Everything is data oriented. And even a lot of the things that work in the background, not human generated, but inside factories, all the sensors that are creating data, and now add in artificial intelligence and add in autonomous vehicles that are coming. It's amazing, and you got to ask yourself, how are we going to keep this all organized and moving around to the benefit of humanity? And the answer is digital infrastructure. Just like we have roads to help us move around, you got to have infrastructure to move data around. And so the way people refer to it is data infrastructure. And when we look across the planet, we see hubs where companies, carrier networks, and content delivery folks, and cloud services, and IT services tend to gather together and form these hubs or nodes where that are very important to moving data around and providing access to data. And so that's a really big takeaway, to understand that firms choose to collate in places where it becomes a critical mass, a hub, if you will, or a node. And so you look around the world, and most big cities are nodes. And when you look at some of the international locations, especially ones on the coast, then they are things that are called global internet hubs. And to be a global internet hub, you can be on this very distinguished list. In America, Miami is one of the top 10 global internet hubs on the planet. And you can see a number in Europe and then in the Far East. And so we started to really look into this as an organization to say, I wonder if our digital infrastructure really is up to speed to really maintain our great advantage as an economy, Hampton Roads and Richmond, and as a great quality of life. So we started looking into this, And we had to teach ourselves to understand what really is what are the components of a global internet hub or an internet hub. So I'm going to give you 101 real quick, and the best way to do it is to build it piece by piece. So I've got like 5 slides that build, but it's going to really explain to you what a digital infrastructure hub is. And it starts with robust terrestrial networks. And you have a lot of different people that own these networks, and some haven't been lit up yet, and some are lit up. But think about spider webs that just get built and owned by mostly private companies, but they get built on top of each other. They don't always connect. But in every market, like blood vessels, you see these robust networks. And the more networks you have, then the more you can move data around quickly between houses and businesses and libraries and governments. Well, some jurisdictions go the extra mile, so to speak, and build network rings, dedicated network rings that connect municipal governments. And that's happened in Hampton Roads, or is happening right now. 5 cities have chipped in to build a municipal network ring that connects their municipalities. So think of it as almost a superhighway within all those other terrestrial networks. And you also have to connect cities. And so think about these as trunk lines. And the more robust that trunk line is, the faster that data can move from one city to another. So this slide really shows you those inner-city terrestrial networks exist, but then connecting those markets is really important. And we're really fortunate, and you'll see in a minute how our Richmond region is connected really closely with Northern Virginia and with Hampton Roads. But having those big inner-city networks, those robust trunk lines is important. And then where do you store the data? Well, that's where data centers come into play. And there are about 12 data centers in Richmond and Hampton Roads. There are many more to the north of us, but that's represented on these dots here. And so that's where data can reside. And it's important when you look at a market, a regional hub, to realize it's not just data centers, it's this terrestrial network, it's those trunk lines. And there's also the reliable power, and this is so important, and I think we're really privileged to have Stan Blackwell here from Dominion. He's going to talk more about this topic. But you got to have that consistent power to make this whole network work. And then there's something that a lot of people don't understand, but I'm going to make it really easy. When you have these networks that overlay terrestrial networks, if you can connect them somehow, and in this business of digital infrastructure, the connection point's called an internet exchange. And they are inside some data centers. Now, not every city has internet exchanges, but those ones that do, and those fiber networks that are independent are now connected at a couple of points called IXPs. That's when you look at a market and you can say, well, there are only 20,000 on this network or 150,000 on this network. When they're connected, you can say, look at the greater Richmond region. There are 1.3 million people connected. And why that's important is those content providers that are so important in this whole digital infrastructure, the Netflix, Google, Microsoft Office, all the stuff that we use day in and then at night watching movies, those content providers don't want to pay for content to have to go from Atlanta to come up. Here's John's movie. He wants to watch it, right? If we have internet exchanges like we do in Richmond, we have one called DKIX, and it has 3 different locations inside data centers. Those content providers go, oh my gosh, there are 1.3 million people here. We're going to store our movies here. We're going to store the Facebook accounts of people here. We're going to store the Microsoft Office account. So when we go and use their tools, all of our data is right here in this market. And that's because we have internet exchanges. So not every hub has an internet exchange, and we're fortunate that we have DKIX here. And so it's just another part of this story, and then subsea cables. And we have 3 that come into Virginia Beach now. We have another group is planning 4 more, and there's one extra capacity with these 3 that come into Camp Pendleton. But having these connections to Europe and to South America is tremendous. And it really puts us in contention of being a global internet hub. And so here's the map all pulled together. So this is what we discovered in looking at this topic and realizing, boy, working with Hampton Roads, they have some of this that we don't, and we up here in the Richmond region have some of the things that they don't. But when you look at it in a bigger market perspective, you go, oh my gosh, we actually are an emerging global internet hub. And so there are 500 cables that connect our planet, deep subsea cables that connect our planet. Some have been in place a long time. It used to be on the East Coast that it was just Hampton, it was just that it was just the Florida, the Miami sort of area, and the New York, New Jersey area. And that's where all our cables went. And you can see from this map, that's the way it looked. But something happened pretty severe. We had that Hurricane Sandy. And when that came in, it caused some of the data centers and digital infrastructure to get a little wet in New York area, and part of Western Europe went dark for a few hours, and it taught all the guys investing in this, we got to be diversified. And so that's what they did. They looked at Virginia Beach and said, let's start thinking about cables coming in there, which run all the way up here, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the benefits of being a digital hub and a global internet hub are many, but at the top of the list, it's having the most robust network and having the best latency, the lowest latency, so fast service, and even having redundancy, so reliable service, and then affordable service. And then, as you guys know, in smart city development, I'm sure you guys have heard that term, this is the kind of infrastructure we really need. And even for municipal governments, like in Hampton Roads, they're saving money by building their own ring. But also equity, to have a really robust system can make it easier for that last mile of service. But when you look at all of these things, I think the argument that really is the most important is our competitiveness. So I want to add to this, it actually, having a digital infrastructure actually grows IT and tech jobs and increases productivity per worker and increases our total GDP output. And let me explain some research we did, and look carefully at your screens on this. We looked at the mature infrastructure hubs across the country, and these are places like Seattle and Dallas and Denver and Portland. They really have invested in this infrastructure. And you look at their 10-year growth rate of IT jobs, 4.5% average annual rate. Really high-paying jobs in the IT tech industry. But look at that 10-year worker productivity, and this is measured by the GDP output by number of workers. So that's 33%, but look at the 10-year GDP growth. Those mature infrastructure cities are really demonstrating dramatic growth. And then look at the 11 cities or regions we compete against in Richmond and Hampton Roads. And this is Raleigh and Nashville and Charlotte. These are the cities that we find ourselves bidding against to try to get investment to come here. So locate in Richmond, locate in the Richmond region. We're lagging behind those mature digital infrastructure cities. And these are our competitors to RVA and 757. And then look at the U.S. average. And then where are we, Richmond region and Virginia Beach, in terms of IT tech workers? We are pulling up the bottom. We're not growing this workforce anywhere close to what the average is in the U.S. or our competitors or those mature digital infrastructure hubs. And it has a consequence on that GDP growth over the last 10 years. So we got to reverse this. We got to have a digital infrastructure that attracts the tech workers, attracts tech companies, so we can have this sort of robust economy in the future. Because every business is a technology business today. Everybody operates with that. So our opportunity to move forward is to look at both Richmond and Hampton Roads together as a global internet hub, because together we have all those assets. And we're seeing that it just started in 2018 when those folks that represent the investors in global subsea cables, they said, let's come ashore at Virginia Beach. And we have seen the percent of East Coast traffic rise since 2018, 18% of it now, that international traffic is going through this region and over to Europe and to South America. So we have 3 cables right now, subsea cables. We have more that are going to happen because we've got the infrastructure that's coming online in Virginia Beach. So we're excited about that. There are going to be 10 new cables on the eastern seaboard. We should get a couple more. We should get our fair share of those as they come aboard. But those cables race up to QTS and Meta, which are 2 huge data centers right outside the Richmond airport. And you need to take a tour of those if you can. You walk inside, it's just football fields. But they have figured out a lot of things, and one of them is got a huge solar power farm, and maybe Stan can speak to that. But it is just amazing the investment that these big companies have made, and those subsea cables in Virginia Beach are part of the whole story. In fact, the whole mega region is part of the story. And then the internet exchange that I talked about, we're part of DKIX, and a lot of other cities are on this. But look at the cities that are on this one: Phoenix and Chicago and Dallas and New York. When does Richmond or Hampton Roads mentioned with those kind of folks, right? So we are now ready for prime time with all of these assets. So what we did as RVA757 Connects is put together a strategic plan, and you have a copy. And on the back of the plan, we list there 10 strategies that we're doing. But this map, when you fold it out, really gives you this whole complete picture of what a robust global internet hub looks like from the lens of Richmond and Hampton Roads together. And so all those orange circles will take you through that whole array of slides that I took you through in terms of those components of an internet hub. And we're thrilled as an association representing Hampton Roads and Richmond, and really funded by the big companies, to say this is our #1 initiative. We've got to make our region stand out on the planet, to get more investment, to move faster in building a robust global internet hub so we can have those jobs of tomorrow and we can satisfy what the companies of tomorrow are going to need. And so that's who we are, and we're delighted to be here and answer any questions at the end. And we've even created a whole website about this topic, globalinternethub.com. And we're thrilled that we have a plan, and now we're moving into implementation. So thank you very much, and we'll move on to another topic, which are data centers, which is part of the bigger story. So
Thank you.
Katie?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We could just get my slideshow pulled up here.
Yeah,
That
just
would
keep
be.
clicking.
Oh, just keep clicking. It's all one now. Well, how about that? Good evening, members of the council, mayor, vice mayor. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Kate, sorry, I was about to say my maiden name, Kate Smiley, Director of Virginia Government Affairs with the Data Center Coalition. I want to start off with a very, very basic question, which was one that pretty much any time I tell somebody what my job is, their first question, other than, what's a lobbyist again, is, what's a data center? Because it is very confusing. There's a lot of words that have probably gotten thrown at you, like latency, that can be a little confusing. Latency, for example, is, as John mentioned, is sort of the time it takes for, let's say, if you're using your credit card at local grocery store, you put your card in the receiver and you're waiting for it to buzz. You're waiting for it to tap. You're sitting there, you're waiting, and it never quite does. And then finally it tells you to pull it out immediately or the whole place is going to burn down, seems like. That time that your card is required to be in that hub is based on latency. The closer you are to a data center that serves that grocery store, the shorter your latency period. So you put your card in, take it out almost immediately. Visa has a huge data center in Northern Virginia that facilitates their ability in our state for us to read cards pretty quickly, a lot faster than you would have been able to 10, 15, 20 years ago. So data centers are essentially the physical location where data, which again is one of those nebulous terms that could mean anything, it's where it's stored. And what happened when sort of the internet revolution happened is a lot of companies started taking data, having it in servers that they had on their own campuses. So, gosh, think of any bad 80s movies that you want. Think of any villain, maybe Alan Rickman, scaling into a building, and he's got to get to the server room because there's critical data in that server room. It wasn't very secure, as we saw from all those great movies in the 80s. You know, you could pretty much hack into there and you get access to hospital files or, you know, any sort of top secret information. Well, as time went on, we discovered that that method was really inefficient and really insecure. There is no reason that if you're a company that is entirely based on serving patients as a healthcare institution, that you should be housing your own data. Why are you now having to be an internet expert and a data storage expert? No, now you're going to put your data in a data center where it will be protected and where it will be sort of housed amongst other servers. So you're also, I'll get in a little bit later to the types of data centers, but you're not having to build that physical infrastructure anymore. You're creating the data, absolutely. But in terms of storing it safely, taking care of it, that's not your job anymore, and it shouldn't have to be. So that's where we really saw the rise of data centers, of these places that essentially house a ton of this data as it continues to be created and created and created en masse. As I can tell you, especially during COVID, you think about online learning and how much data that created and how much we needed data to be able to get from point A to point B using data centers. And you're storing in data centers, you're storing curriculum, you're storing grades, you're storing plans. That's not physically located in the schools as much anymore. My grades, my papers, I'm hoping they've been, tragically lost in a very sad flood up in Philadelphia. But, kids nowadays, sorry, your papers are going to be stored in a very secure data center, and there is no way you can hack into that thing. So with that said, we'll move on to just a few of the slides I have here have to do with just sort of the exponential growth we've seen. A lot of it is really intuitive. As we grow sort of our own data footprint, how much we're using our phones, our TVs in a different way. Maybe, gosh, they have, smart refrigerators now. All of that requires data. And so you can see just this exponential growth. And this chart only goes to 2023. You got to think that doesn't include some of the really high intensity usages that are going to come up when it comes to AI, which uses a lot of data and uses a lot of physical space in data centers. Believe it or not, most US households have about 22 connected devices to the internet. And before you think, well, that's not me, I'm old school. More than you would think. Your car, more often than if you've got a Garmin, that may count. It's really, if you've got a sort of smart home, maybe your thermostat is a smart thermostat, that's connected. All of that data, which you want to be private, is now housed in a data center, so you don't have to keep the server in your house, because that would be very cumbersome and frustrating and probably not aesthetically pleasing. There are a lot of new products, experiences, apps driving demand. One thing on here that is absolutely going to drive, not to use a terrible pun, I just realized, but drive further use of data centers is autonomous vehicles, because that's somewhere where you really need basically a period of no latency. If you're trying to figure out whether or not you're going to hit a pedestrian, you don't want that car moving as it's trying to figure out what's in front of you. You need really quick feedback from the system to your vehicle. So again, we need more data centers for that type of technology. There are two, without going too far into the details, two types of data centers in Virginia. You've got the hyperscalers, which are sort of what you might traditionally think of. You think of these big tech companies that might have their own facilities, so maybe Google or Amazon Web Services, Microsoft. They've got these very large data centers throughout the state, and then the other type is the multi-tenant type. Think of that almost like a traditional commercial office building, not in terms of how it's built. It's still going to look similar to a hyperscaler location, but it's a location where maybe a lot of companies can come in and store their servers next to each other. So your small business and your small business and your medium business and your large business all decide to come in together, and instead of establishing your own data center, you're leasing space in a data center. The basics of a data center, I really recommend if you haven't taken a tour. They're really cool. I use the word cool intentionally, because were it not for very deliberate, constant efforts to keep these rooms at an appropriate temperature, they would be incredibly hot. That is where data center energy usage really comes from is these servers, they get really, really, really hot, and they've got to be cooled down. There are data centers that use water and power to do both of those things. There are waterless data centers too. Those use a little bit more power. So two also sort of business models. Think about it. Think of it that way. Here's just a broader map of where some of the larger data centers are in Virginia. You can see there are a lot when you get to Prince William, when you get to Loudoun County, but they are coming to other parts of the state, especially the Richmond area. Many of the locations that John talked about earlier. Data Center Alley is traditionally Northern Virginia. And that's for a few reasons that I'll get into later. But one thing I do want to note, specifically for Virginia and why we have so many, just aside all of the great tax benefits that have brought these companies in and the investments that the return on investment that Virginia has gotten, there is a national security reason that these companies are here. And that's that we don't have extreme weather events that are necessarily going to disrupt some of the data centers that serve our government. At some of the clandestine services. There are sort of existing labor markets for the types of security that some of those larger data centers need in Northern Virginia. And frankly, when it comes to some of the private communications that you may send to each other on a day-to-day basis, might be a little less comfortable if those were in an unfriendly nation, if all of that data was being housed in a different country. So there's a reason that these data centers are in America, and there's a reason that they are in Virginia specifically. So let's turn to what data centers look for when they are trying to figure out where to go. It's pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to read off this slide. It's you need the infrastructure. You need to make sure that you've got access to water. Doesn't have to be drinking water, just need access to water for cooling purposes unless you're a waterless data center. You need reliable energy. That is a big issue. Having a labor pool that can serve your data center is great. And making sure that there's sort of land that is available in the first place. You're not going to find a lot of data centers in the heart of DC, for example. So with all of that in mind, that's sort of what data center companies might look for. But I think the more important question for you all would be, why would a locality want a data center to come to them in the first place? Something I found interesting was there was a study done by the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the EDP, said in the last 2 years of all of the announced economic development projects done in Virginia, 79% of that announcement, not the number of announcements, but the amount of money invested came from data center companies. 79% in the last 2 years. And that is because we have such a rich environment for data centers to come in. We have such a great workforce, highly educated workforce, great great power grid that Stan will be able to speak more to, but this is a great environment for data centers. And so the sort of other side of that coin is it's not just a great place for data centers to go, it's a great place where we want them to, because we've seen that time after time with the state tax incentive program, something along the lines of looking at Prince William and Loudoun, $13 in local tax revenue is generated for every $1 in services that they consume. So that's a pretty big ROI, $13 compared to $1 of services consumed. And then, of course, there's all the other, secondary and tertiary benefits, the supporting labor markets, because we're not just talking about people employed by the data centers. We're talking about the restaurants nearby. We're talking about the builders that work on these sites, landscapers, the people that, bring the floral arrangements. It is incredible how many of these businesses would have been shut down in Data Center Alley during COVID were it not for the need for those data centers to keep running. During COVID, we needed data centers more than ever. They kept running when a lot of other businesses shut down. And all those second and tertiary businesses that support them were able to stay alive during COVID. And I would say that, another big benefit is that a lot of the data center jobs that I'm talking about, and again, the secondary, the tertiary jobs, don't have to have a 4-year degree, which is really important. You can get certifications for a lot of these jobs. I just covered that good stuff. GDP impact is pretty enormous in Virginia. Happy to get more information to you on that. Lots of counties, cities, towns have positioned themselves competitively to try to draw in data centers. We've got some clips of different localities trying to do just that. I just wanted to show 2 slides of the growth. We all sort of hear Loudoun and Prince William, and we know that there's data center growth there. Well, I just want some evidence in front of you of how much, in terms of millions, they're bringing in because of the data centers that have chosen to locate in those counties. Interestingly enough, with Prince William County, we did the math, and as of 2023, the amount of money that data centers pay in local taxes is equivalent to about 13 cents in the real estate tax rate. Makes that much of a difference. The average homeowner cost to maintain county spending levels without data centers would be about $600 a household. So it is significant. And then this is just another slide. Again, I talked about the $1 in terms of what a data center uses and its employees use in terms of county services, and it averages out to about $13 in terms of what they contribute. These are just some counties throughout Virginia that have been announcing or trying to attract data centers recently. And then lastly, I'm not going to read off of these slides, but on clean energy, I mean, it is because they do use a significant amount of energy, it is in the best interest of data centers to be incredibly forward-thinking when it comes to both the sources of their energy and then also how they're using that energy. So it makes a difference to their bottom line if they're being efficient with that energy or not. Energy efficiency levels have gotten higher and higher and higher. There's something called PUE. I'm not going to go into it, but essentially it's a measure of how efficient you can be. And the PUE of data centers has just and it's good if you're low PUE. It's gone down over the years as people have figured out more and more efficient ways to use energy. It's absolutely incredible. And of course, some of the biggest purchasers of clean energy in America are data center companies, and that goes for Virginia too. You'll often see announcements of one company or another setting up their own solar farm or setting up a small nuclear reactor to try to power their location, but they are on the cutting edge of this stuff, and it's really exciting to hear about. So with that, I will end my presentation. Went much longer than I intended to. I apologize, but I guess we're doing questions at the end.
Stan's going to say a few remarks.
All right, and then I'll turn it over to Stan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Stan Blackwell with Dominion Energy. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And the three of us are going to complement each other, so you're going to get a power perspective, and you'll find as I talk, it'll kind of wrap the bow on a lot of the things you've heard. I'm going to, already. So let me start by saying we are fortunate at Dominion Energy to serve the largest data center market in the world. It is so big in Virginia that if you it changes a little bit every year, you can add up the next 4 or 5 largest markets in the U.S. together, and they're still not as big as Virginia is. We are by far the largest data center market in the world. It's the fastest growing segment or industry that we're experiencing in the U.S. and the world. Certainly in our territory, it is the growth driver today, not only for our company, but across the world. So it is it's just booming. I've got some statistics up here to put it in perspective. And so we're serving about 3,100, almost 3,200 megawatts of actual data center load. North Anna nuclear plant, which is roughly about an hour away, is about 1,400 megawatts. So we're today consuming the power. We have such a large industry. It's about the equivalent of 2 nuclear plants today. And so just to put that in perspective, and it's growing. And for all the reasons that they shared, it's what society's driving into the industry are driving this. This industry continues to get more and more efficient, but our uses in society that we need or want data centers to provide are driving additional needs within this industry. And so that gives you a perspective. Dominion Energy is obviously the largest utility provider in the state of Virginia, and data centers today are 24% of all of the kilowatt hours we sell today across the state for all our segments. And our demand for data centers, you kind of measure it in terms of growth, but we're growing anywhere from 400 to 500 megawatts, okay, is an industry term a year. So over 3 years, that means you got to build another very large generation plant to support the growth that we have. And we're doing that. We work hand in hand. Those resources, those generation plants are from a variety of fuel sources, renewables, low carbon, other low carbon sources, offshore wind. We're doing a variety of those things because that's what our customers in the data center industry want, and that's what many of your constituents want. They want a balance of generation sources. And this industry is growing significantly. We, on average, connect 15 data centers a year. We have a very large number under development today, and so you can see we've done since 2019, 94 data centers. We average about 15 a year, and we'll continue. We've been doing that since 2013, and there's no stop to it. So if you're looking for an industry that's growing, if you're looking for an industry to provide local jobs, tax revenues, and all the things that were just shared with you, this is the industry to look at. It's here and it's going to continue. And so one of the questions we get is, do you think this industry, is it just a fad and is it going to slow down? Here's a very good analogy. So I was a pretty young guy when black and white TVs came out. You all have one, had about 3 channels on it. Go into Costco or Sam's today, and it's hard to understand all the technology, curved screens, 4K, whatever, LEDs, just all this technology. So you would have thought TVs would have kind of saturated out. But if you go in your house, you don't have one TV anymore, and it's a smart TV. You probably have 3 or 4 TVs. And there's all kinds of technology on it. And so my point being, the continued growth in data centers is a continuous evolution of technology. That's the way to think about why this growth is going to continue. It's just a way to think about it. To put it in perspective, this is the growth trajectory for our company only. In our service territory, there are other utilities in Virginia, some co-ops that serve data center load and are growing. And this gives you the kind of growth we've seen. It really took it's not a linear growth. It's, if you remember your high school algebra, it's hard to remember that, but the quadratic equation, that describes the growth of our industry, and it's growing at an increasing rate. What's good is most of our growth was primarily up in Northern Virginia, really Loudoun County. The industry has changed, and so we're talking about down the Hampton Roads in the Richmond area and up the I-95 corridor. The industry is moving. They're still developing there, but there's so many applications. You have an opportunity, if that's what you want for your community, to bring this kind of industry here because it's exploding all over the state of Virginia. And we see a lot of these projects well in advance. We serve 50 discrete data center companies today, and we're serving over 400 individual data centers, and they're developing all over the state, kind of moving down 95. We have them in Richmond, we have them in Southside, and so it's here, it's coming, and maybe that's the type of industry you'd like to have here. The one question we get, there are different sizes of data centers. There's certainly different sizes. There is one in the town of Ashland, relatively small, and it's served by the power lines that serve your house. It's a relatively small data center. We want those. Those are good. You go up near Dulles Airport, you're going to see some of the biggest data centers in the world, and they require infrastructure. So I've got pictures. Substation is on your right, I believe, and so on my left. And then there's transmissions on the other side of that page. And so for a modern data center today, given the scale, we have to build transmission infrastructure to that piece of property, and we have to build a substation on site to serve that. Now, when we do that, when you extend transmission, that's kind of the backbone system for electricity, you're adding reliability into the area. So at your house, on normal small distribution lines, you have a lot of tree exposure. When you build transmission, it's pretty high in the air, and you don't really have tree outages. And so your reliability of your area improves when you add transmission infrastructure. And when we build a substation, it's another option for other customers to take power. You always want to try and connect. If we build a data center and you decide to build a house next to it, the odds are the substation sitting on that data center property will probably feed your house. So it also provides options for electric service that way. But it depends pretty much on the size of your data center. And so one of the things you have to consider as you look at property in your county is proximity to existing transmission is always important. You're not more than likely going to pick a property right outside this room because we have to bring transmission into here. That's probably not what you want to see, but you have areas of the county where we have existing transmission, and they are perfect data center properties. So one of the things we tell many communities like yourself is you look for the properties that are very close or have existing transmission. Your constituents already see it today, and so they're more than willing to have that there. And for most big data center developments, the substation's going on site now. It's going right on the property. That's a partnership we do with the industry to do that as well. And so those are the considerations we recommend. You don't have to do that, but that tends to make that the delivery of service for the data center to get up and running and the ease of us to provide electricity. That's usually the magic mix is proximity to existing infrastructure is really the way to think about that. And I just kept it short, happy to answer questions. The three of us are happy to answer questions. I don't know if I've given you what you need for power, so.
Yes, indeed, I'm sure. I'll defer to Dr.
I have quite a few, and I think I have them for each of you, but I can start in your order.
Sure.
So when you mentioned fastest growing industry, what are some fail-safes that you've seen, like, for the future in case there is some infrastructure shutdown or something happens and, I don't know, we're oversaturated with data centers and now technology has grown in a weird direction and we don't need quite the size we once had. Are there any fail-safes that you've kind of worked through?
Yeah, so you've got a mix of things, so let me try it this way. So if you think about the first computer you had in your house, it was quite bulky and, it's similar to latency. You had windows and you'd see the hourglass. And that really had to do with how fast that chip speed worked because they weren't networked to the internet at the time. And you kept upgrading. They went from regular CPUs. You may remember the word Pentium, and they kept upgrading. So chip technology continues to advance. and continues to get smaller because most of you have a laptop today. You don't have the big machine sitting there. And so as they get smaller, they get faster. And so that's driving growth in the industry because you can do more in the same square footage. So my point is we're not seeing a slowdown. We're actually seeing an acceleration. And just like my TV analogy, it's new technologies that are driving what you do. Your first cell phone, you didn't text on it, and you didn't have video on it, and you couldn't look anything up. Now you can't figure out how to use it.
And it was this big.
And it was that big.
And a battery pack that was behind your seat.
So the point is those types of societal changes are what's driving growth. And we have the amount of volume of requests in Virginia to build new data centers is astronomical. And so it's not slowing down. Now, from a power perspective, when we feed power to any large business, it could be a manufacturer, industrial, or a data center, our service voltage for transmission, we tend to bring it's 230,000 volt lines. And we tend to network them, meaning we have 2 lines going in there. So if you lose one, you know the facility doesn't lose power. They have a second source. And that's how we maintain the reliability. And I will say one thing for you to consider is a good data center site is a good manufacturing site, is a good industrial site. They're fundamentally the same is the way to think about it. And so as you think about, sites you may want to consider, that's an easy way to look at it.
Another question for you. So I see the renewable energy use, and I'm curious, what's the break-even point for an energy company to have solar, to have wind? At what point, how long does it take for it to be profitable both for those who are concerned with the environment and those who are concerned with consuming energy?
It's not that easy of a question. So let me say it this way. So if you have to build offshore wind turbines, which we are doing, you're building 27 miles off the coast. You have to run cables all the way to shore. And so it's a very expensive initial build. There's no fuel cost. Solar, you could build one outside the town of Ashland. You could do that. There's no fuel cost, And so it depends on the type of generation you're building. At Dominion Energy, we believe in a diversified fuel mix. So we like a little bit of all types of generations so that you always have a source to generate power. So we're putting a mix onto our system. Now, the data center industry, I agree 100%. They are at the forefront of the drive for renewable energy. That's one of the things they talk to us about all the time. And so in our diversified generation mix, just say we're 50% renewable. Data centers go, we want to be 100, or each one defines their goal differently, and so they can go to the outside market and green the amount we can't provide. So, that's kind of the way that industry works, and I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to continue all of my questions or wait and let other people ask?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I may. When someone comes in front of us to say they're going to build a gas station or whatever, they're responsible for paying for all of the things to build it. So who pays for building the substation and those things in a data center? Is it like Facebook because they're going to use the building, or who's responsible for building and paying for those items?
So the answer is the same for you as a homeowner as for that facility. So if we come in and build a facility, you ask us to build your data center, and you say, come build me a substation because I want all the power.
Right.
We sign contracts with you and say, we'll build this, but if you back out or don't show up, you reimburse us for everything we put in the ground for that facility. We'll build it, but you got to show up. And then the way utility rates are structured, then you will pay the vast majority of that as you consume power. Now, remember, I said data centers today are consuming 24% of all the kilowatt hours, the energy we produce. So they're carrying their fair share.
But are you saying me, the consumer, sitting in my house on Howard Street, or me, the individual who's going to be using that data center, like a Facebook or a Bank of America?
My example was data center, but let's say right next to that, you build a house. We're not going to build a substation for your house.
Correct.
But your rates are structured so that the infrastructure that's providing.
So we will all share the cost.
Yes.
Okay.
But because data centers are so energy intensive, they're carrying a larger portion. It's just the way the rates are designed. Their rates, they're paying they use a lot more energy in a 24-hour period than you would. So they're going to pay a much larger portion
Down the
of
road.
that.
Initially, I will pay for it, the consumer, and then down the road.
Our experience is when you connect a data center, they turn on. That data center's, my simple analogy is like a chainsaw. If you have a chainsaw, you never really leave it idling. It's either on full speed or it's not. And that's the way to think about a data center. You crank them up and they run.
Okay.
Hey,
Thank you.
I think Councilwoman Barnhart just asked the question I was thinking. When these data centers are built, what does any of that cost fall back on the residents around it? And I think that's pretty much what you just asked.
Yeah, so I must have not answered
I
this
think
one. Yeah, okay, fair.
You've already answered
So
that.
the transmission system, the backbone system, those costs are allocated to all customers. However, in rate design, you look at the energy usage of each different type of customer. So you look at the residential segment as a whole, you design a rate to recover their portion of that. You look at the industrial, commercial, data center settings, say here's their aggregate usage, here's how much we have to build, and here's how they use that. And so you try to apportion the cost of what you have to build out so that every segment is paying its fair share. Did that help?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like mine's.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
I said, so the way you're asking, the residential customer isn't carrying the freight for a data center business. Is not. The way you're asking, but that's the way to think about it.
Yeah, I was concerned.
If I can just piggyback a little bit, and I think the reason this keeps coming up is this is one of the critiques we hear. If a data center were to come, and I think some folks get the impression that we just did a great presentation on how demand is through the roof, and that's demand for power, that's demand for data centers, and going back to, again, high school or college, demand up usually means prices would go up as well. And I think that's what the residents are kind of sitting out there thinking is if a data center were to apply to come to Ashland and this board were to approve it, I think there's this notion out there that by voting yes on that, you're basically saying our power rates in the area are going to go up, or what I pay as a resident is going to go up.
Yeah, so regardless in the service territory where a data center locates, it could locate in Loudoun County, it could locate in the city of Ashland or Richmond or Hampton Roads. The rates aren't designed by county or by city. They're designed over the aggregate service territory. And so the fact that a data center is built right next to this does not affect Ashland only in that question. It's across the aggregate of the service territory. So
Thank you.
has that helped?
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a more general question that anyone might want to try to respond. Get all excited by the revenue to personal service or service ratio. And y'all have done a good job of at least convincing this council person that we should be looking towards data centers. And we've done some things. We've got a site that I'd say is 120 acres that's on a Dominion power line on the east side of town. We've also adjusted, correct me, Mr. Manager, our personal property rates for data centers to be, I think, competitive with our neighbors. What else should we be doing, assuming we want data centers and have places to put them?
Well, I'll give my answer, and then Kate, you may want to add, but the industry has a need for workers. And so the industry in Northern Virginia, I'm involved in an organization up there on a board, and one of the things we reached out was we went to local community colleges, or you could go to a college, they happen to do it at a community college, to develop programs. Some, college isn't for everybody, but there are really good jobs in the data center industry or technology industry, and so they created a program to grow workers for the area. You got a college right next door. So I would think that kind of development would be something to think about.
I'll step up to the mic for those listening in. I think two things are really important, but I don't know that it matters whether the business you're trying to attract is necessarily a data center or another type of light manufacturing or anything else. I think consistency is important. So being consistent in decisions moving forward and predictability. So, but I think that sort of those features are important to any business looking to locate in a new area. So I think as data center companies necessarily look at Ashland being able to say, okay, this is a dependable business environment where we're not going to have the rug pulled out from under us based on their great track record of X, Y, Z. But I think that's not data center specific. I think that's economic development specific.
I noticed that in your handouts you said that you help package viable data center locations. So is that something you work with our economic development?
No, but it should be.
Sorry.
No, I think that I think Stan pointed out that being near a transmission line is a good thing. And so I just think you got to look at what's available and point people towards that. And then also your sensible zoning, and to make sure you don't disrupt that. So that's predictable, and people make economic bets based on the zoning. So all of that goes into the play.
And y'all do help provide let's say companies that are interested in locating, you help direct them, or maybe Dominion does.
Yeah, so let me answer your question a little bit different, then I'll get to that one. So kind of the best in practice communities, counties, cities that we see that want to attract data centers, the zoning is in sync with the wishes of the community. There are communities where the zoning's out, the zoning says, yes, you can have a data center, but the board of supervisors is not there. And so something to consider is, are they in sync? Which really, I think, is the point there. The second one, it's kind of you'll hear this over and over from data center companies, time to market. And it's just how fast can they turn it on, or how fast can we get infrastructure to it. And so a fast track program may be something you want to consider. That will attract companies, any kind of company, but data center industries will attract you because you say you're not going to have a year and a half to get this approved. We've got a fast track. Those are kind of the best practices we see, on your side of the chair. The other thing you may want to consider, some communities have mixed use zoning, so you've got a school and they decide they're going to put a data center next to it. It can be done, but it's very difficult for you in your elected position, but it exists. And so when I say look for properties on existing transmission, hopefully you've got other ones there, because kind of to John's point, once you build a data center, you're going to have fiber running to it, multiple fiber pipes. So the next company that comes in really likes to be as close as possible to that. You tend to see clustering or proximity becomes important. And so if you want to have a data center technology park, whatever term you want, find an area like that near existing infrastructure. That's where you want the development. And if you sell that development, quick zoning, fibers here, those are kind of the best practices we see. What I don't recommend, and we have some of this, is you say, I want to attract data centers. You can go anywhere you want in the county, and then they go, I want downtown Ashland, and then all of a sudden, it just doesn't work. Thinking about where you want them is is that way exactly what she said. You're not, well, I didn't really mean that. And that does happen. So did that?
Thank you. Yes.
Did that help?
Yes, that helped.
You've got more?
I got a few more. So first I'm going to opine for a little bit, and then I'm going to ask a real question because I wanted to give the context. So I've done deep research on this topic, and in 2018, it was pretty much one of the three things I was running on was fiber connection and data centers. And I saw a lot of good that I saw it outweighing some of the concerns that people had. But what I hadn't done was like really do a deep dive into what the concerns that constituents would have, and really making sure that I think about those. And I see that happening in other localities where the constituents are like, oh, you're moving faster than I was ready for, and you haven't thought it through. So questions I have, first I have to jump to, I was at a town hall with Congressman Whitman, and he was giving us the state of security of our nation. And one of his biggest concerns, other than the supply of bullets, apparently we're running out of bullets. Like he was, yeah. It was a serious topic. For defense, not for attack. Like I didn't even know that there were defense bullets. It was weird. But sorry, I went off topic. But the concern was that China has sent a message to us a couple of times, and they had hacked into either a water server. I don't know if it's a data server, but a server that connects to the water supplies, a server that connects phone lines. They didn't do anything apparently, but they sent the message of we're up there with you. And so when I heard you say, "Oh, you can't hack into this data center," I'd love for you to reassure me that you can't hack into it. Like how is it that Congressman Whitman is saying they did, but they're not going to do it here? So yes.
Happy to speak to that. I think that's my fault for phrasing it as impossible to. However, to say that it would be much more accurate to say that our data is right now far more secure. Okay. The way that our infrastructure is built around data centers now than it was 20 years ago, when you might have data stored in a facility where the facility is not meant to hold, the primary purpose isn't to hold that data. The primary purpose may be a hospital. But now we have these dedicated facilities. And to your point, I think it's not just China, it's North Korea and, any number of bad actors, a lot of non-governmental actors who, we saw with Colonial Pipeline. A couple of years ago, we saw that there were ransom attacks. Those happen all the time. So I don't think anyone or any industry is necessarily immune. I would not want to put that forward. I'm just going to go ahead and say that if you tour a data center facility, you will see they are incredibly secure, both physically in terms of trying to physically penetrate that facility, but also the sort of fail-safes they have when it comes to cybersecurity are very, very impressive. Because when you get down to it, just think about your Gmail or your AOL mail or whatever it may be. The consistent security of that mail is the reason that you're using that company. Right. If it's leaking like a sieve, you don't want to use that company. So it is, frankly, in the corporate best interest of the hyperscalers, as well as the companies that own those multi-tenant facilities, to keep that data as secure as possible because their reputations are staked on it.
Yeah. Well, I believe you on that. And I noticed that there's a lot of banks that were partnered up with RVA757 Connects. And it's interesting because we have to do our own training for cybersecurity. And it's amazing to me how many really smart people in their industry can be fooled by somebody because they're not skilled in the art of defense, as so to speak, as you will. But while you're still here,
sure.
Are there any federal recommendations from like the Federal Communications Commission or the Department of Environmental Quality that would say, hey, there's a best practice here, and let's make sure we're meeting all the best practices? And I want to say it in a way that kind of like the environment, when we built this building, we built it with like the highest level. We didn't get the certification because it cost too much money to get certified. Yeah. But there's like, you can build a building at the gold level, at the bronze, like you can build it at the preem level for the environment and for the and for the community. And so I was just curious, like.
Right. So those sort of like LEED certifications and other certifications, also they have metrics for industrial sites as well. So there are currently certifications for various, whether it's a data center or any other type of manufacturing facility, you can achieve certain levels of energy efficiency that gets you to a certain level of, gold star on your report card.
Are they detractors?
I'm sorry?
Are they detractors? Would some of the people who want a data center, would they say, oh, well, you want it at this level, that's too far for us? Or is there like a nice median where
like an anti-environmentalist just for fun?
No, sometimes government gets a bad rap for zoning.
Yeah.
And people say, oh no, you zoned it this way, I can't build anything. And it does not that you can't build anything, it's just we want it built a certain way. We want trees in a certain spot.
Sure.
We want a certain number of bushes. We want a sidewalk. And I'm just curious, are any of those types of things that, like, have you seen where localities had zoned it and data centers or whatever are thinking, that's too much work, or that doesn't matter, though it doesn't matter the amount because the income is coming in for us as a business that
Sure.
will do what the community wants. That I'm just curious, like, how that weighs out.
Sure. You don't really hear much about the projects that just never happened from Jump Street, but you do hear about projects where, let's say, a piece of property was bought, relationships were built, hands were shaken, and somewhere in the process, clearly there was a miscommunication either about zoning by right or some other issue. That absolutely does happen, and that's why I think, to my earlier point about consistency and reliability, just creating that environment that is both attractive to whatever company it is that you would like to bring in, but that's not your only concern. You're also concerned with constituents and what they want, and sort of balancing those two interests is really important, and making sure that you've got those in mind when you do the zoning initially is really important. But in terms of sort of looping back to the energy efficiency and environmental considerations, like I said, when it comes to energy efficiency, these facilities would love to use zero power if they could and keep everything cool. I mean, they're trying to be as efficient as possible because it hurts their bottom line to use more energy if they don't have to. So, it is, given that they use so much energy, I think the incentives are there for a data center company in a way that they might not be when you're building, a residential home or any other facility. So I hope that answers your question.
It does.
Okay, when you mentioned hacks earlier, I was so comfortable with your response, with what you said. I'm like, oh, don't have to worry about that. And then after you sat down, I'm like, how is that not possible? So that was a question that I also had written down until Council Member McGraw asked. And
sure, and I apologize for being, I think, flippant with my language.
It sounded good.
But I will say that, just the security of data, it is, given the number of highly secure transactions that need to happen sort of in the cloud or online these days. How much banking do you do in person anymore? It's incredible. All of that stuff, those security guards at the door need to be at the data center now, because that's where the hacks are intended. And so that's where preemptively security has been built up, understanding that they are the new targets. They fully understand the responsibility that they've taken on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have one more?
Just one more. Just one more. And it's just a clarification.
No, if y'all have time.
No, just to clarify for people watching, so RVA757 Connects is not advocate. They're not like, their sole purpose is not data. It's the whole community. You're connecting Virginia Beach with Richmond through all kinds of economic means. That is
correct.
And I just wanted to clarify that.
We're an association of businesses that are trying to advance the economies of both Hampton Roads and Richmond.
Right.
And it's our belief that through greater connections, whether it's a road like I-64 or a trail, multi-use trail, or digital infrastructure, the closer we're connected, the better we're connected, the better we're going to influence a positive growing economy.
Yep. And passenger rail.
And passenger rail. That's right. And I do want to mention something on the security issue. It is a defining topic when it comes to data and digital infrastructure. There is no question. We are fortunate in that the Hampton Roads in the Richmond region have a competitive advantage in the industry cluster of cybersecurity, that we are second to Washington, D.C. in the whole country as having an overrepresentation of cybersecurity professionals here, 5 times to the average in any other location. And so our colleges and universities and our workforce councils in both Hampton Roads and Richmond gearing up for this growth in data and having all kinds of training programs and certification programs and college degrees in cybersecurity is just going to increase our advantage there. And so when companies are looking on where to locate, one of the things they look for in this space is the number and propensity of cybersecurity professionals to be in this location. And we've got that already. And so that's a tremendous advantage that we're going to start to wave around a lot more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have.
Okay.
I had one more question to someone. Do you build these facilities with the idea that you already have them filled, or that you're going to build them and they will come? Because I'm sure that some of our neighbors are concerned about all these giant buildings and everything, cost, et cetera, and they're just going to sit there empty. So do you have
These buildings do not sit empty.
Yeah, okay, that's
They
all I need to
absolutely
know.
do not sit empty. Given the astronomical growth in the demand for data usage, we are not building them fast enough, frankly.
Okay, so it's not like the strip mall down the street where we have some empty stores.
No, and that actually ties back to an earlier question that you had about sort of, is this an industry that, might be a fad or, may go out of style? The answer is no, definitely not. And, one thing we can point to is some of these data centers have been in Virginia, especially in Northern Virginia. They've been there for at least a decade, and over that decade, you've seen incredible, leaps and bounds in terms of the technology that they're using. The servers aren't just bought and they sit there; they're refreshed constantly, and get essentially facelifts every few months to make sure that they're reflecting the latest, energy efficiency technology, chip technology, sort of everything you could possibly think of that goes into a data center. Sort of is slowly, I don't even want to say slowly but surely, quickly and shortly, being updated to reflect the most recent technological breakthroughs. So not only is a data center facility pretty much full the second it goes online, but it's also going to be refreshed over the years so that it doesn't end up sort of this legacy, data center that just holds the old crap that we don't think is that important. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Mr. Manager?
Sure. I'll preface this by saying we are going to take our town council for a tour, hopefully go actually check out a data center to get it in person. But you can see the tact I'm going is citizens' concerns we've had. I can imagine that most sound issues are probably an engineering issue of some sort, whether it's the HVAC or something. Can any of you give us any reassurance that whether it's newer data centers, that's not as common an issue, or that there are actual solutions to that if you just put your mind to it?
So I think that sound concerns are valid. I think anybody who would come up and tell you that sound issues are not going to be a problem in the future would be lying to you. That's why zoning is so important. There are also mitigation efforts that can be put into place by companies and are put in place by companies to make sure that it brings the decibel level down. It's sort of incumbent on both zoners to know ahead of time where potential problems might be. But I think that you can get a sense from maybe where data centers have been built in other localities, and there are a lot of best practices. Maybe they're not written down, but I'm sure in talking to other locality managers, they absolutely can tell you where it's worked and where it hasn't. Because frankly, there are places where it has been challenging, and there have been other places where not one person has mentioned sound, noise, whatever. Right. It's just really important that both zoning is appropriate and that the mitigation efforts are done by the company.
Thank you.
All right. Continuing to follow up with questions or assertions you hear. We've talked about power, but also hear about water. And so like right now, say 24% of the power that Dominion is producing is for data centers. What about water capacity? Because I've heard someone say, yeah, if Hanover County does X, Y, and Z, that's going to take the water to where we can't do other development. And if there is a case like that, we worry sometimes about you want to present yourself as open to new businesses, and you would hope that you don't have businesses that are just basically looking at files and saying, nah, this spot doesn't have this spot doesn't have that, without having conversation about how you might mitigate what may look like a lapse or a weakness in some areas. So what about water? How much of a big deal is that?
Sure. So depends on who you ask, because there are waterless data centers,
Right.
for example.
And
They
let
are
me just
not
interrupt
as
for a
common.
second and say that, if it's just like if I can get a phone that has no wire, why would I buy one with a wire? If I can get a data center that's waterless, then why would I build one with water?
Sure.
So anyway, if you can add that into it.
Sure. Well, while it's at top of mind, the reason is because sometimes the power infrastructure isn't there to help with the load, that extra load that water would
Okay.
otherwise be helping with in terms of cooling.
Offsets it.
Yeah. So no water means more energy. That's there is sort of a balance there.
Okay.
To my knowledge, there is nowhere in Virginia, there has not been any trade-offs that a locality, or let's say the State Water Control Board, or DEQ and its permitting authority they haven't run into issues of being able to say, I'm sorry, we can't serve this data center because we need to make sure there's adequate, let's say, water for this other manufacturing site or drinking water, or this golf course that might use a lot of water. To my knowledge, that has not yet been a problem, because I think when it comes to permitting, typically there is a look at, okay, depending on the watershed that you're in, how is this going to impact, say, salinity matters in parts of the state.
Right.
It can get fairly complex when you're talking about natural ecosystems and water sources, but I don't know that that's as much of an issue here.
Okay.
I hope that answers your
Yes, it does. And one last one for me. The heights of the structures. Obviously, if you're going to build a footprint for an apartment building, it's easier to have more stories. Are the heights are they naturally getting higher, or is there a happy medium in height? And does the height have anything to do with the noise production?
Sure. That is something I will get you an answer on, because I do not know off the top of my head.
Okay.
I know there's been, I think it was a 110-foot tall one up in Fairfax County that has made the news. But to my knowledge, that's not very common
Okay.
to have a tall data center. So I can get back to you on some of the sort of when site design happens, why
Right.
it is that some of those choices are made. That might take a little bit of time, but I'll talk to some engineers about it and try to get back to you on
Appreciate
that.
I can add to that. So by far, the largest portion of the industry in Virginia are two-story data centers. We have there's a permit in place to build a 4 or 5-story one, I think. That's very atypical, because the costs it gets more expensive as you go up. And now, a 2-story data center, remember, it's all about cooling, so it's probably the height of about a 3-story building. It's 2 stories, but the
Right.
very tall, the floor to ceiling is atypical of an industrial building. But high 90% of them are 2 stories in that context.
Sure. Okay. No, thank you. Obviously, we can all muse for a while and come up with other questions, and there are new ones every day, but we really appreciate y'all's time. Ashland is a small town, but I think we have big responsibilities for our citizens, just like anywhere else, and for the town's future. So we really appreciate the education you provided and the resource that y'all will continue to be for us. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.